Hello and welcome to Jazz Congress 2021. My name is Seton Hawkins and I'm the Director of Public Programs at Jazz at Lincoln Center. It's my tremendous pleasure to welcome you to our session today, Mentoring Women in Jazz, which is going to be moderated by Katie Simon. Before we begin, there are just a few announcements I want to make. Firstly, in order to provide everyone with a safe and positive experience, there is absolutely no recording of any portion of this session permitted. We also ask that you refrain from taking screenshots or posting sections of these classes on social media. If you'd like to ask our panelists a question, you can do so by leaving it in the chat by hovering over and clicking on the text bubble logo in the upper right of your screen. If you don't see it in the upper right, it might be above your screen or overlaid on your screen, depending on the device you're using. If you don't see it anywhere, you might be in full screen mode and you'll need to exit out of full screen mode in order to take part. As questions occur to you, feel free to type them in. We will be monitoring the chat and bringing questions here for the panelists to answer and to engage with. So please do feel free to participate. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome our moderator for this session. Katie Simon is the senior producer and managing editor for Jazz Night in America, a radio and video program that explores jazz and its intersections with American culture through high-quality live music and documentary storytelling. It's hosted by Christian McBride and produced by Jazz Lincoln Center, WBGO, and NPR. It is a tremendous, tremendous honor to be here again with Katie Simon and to welcome her. And with that, Katie, over to you.
Seton, thank you so much. It's really my pleasure to be here with a bunch of amazing women that we have to talk about mentoring women in jazz today. Before we get started with the conversation, I do want to give a quick introduction to everybody who's on this chat with us. So I'm going to run through those pretty quickly. First, we have Amy Bormit, who's a pianist, a vocalist, and a composer. She was an artist in residence for Betty Carter Jazz Ahead and a Mary Lou Williams emerging artist. She studied with Jerry Allen and Ellen Rowe, and she created the Washington Women in Jazz Festival in 2011, and she is currently the director there. We have Kimberly Chamura, who founded KCC Productions, a full-service production company in 2003. It's in Miami. They curate arts and culture programming for the public. They manage artists and they produce tours and recordings. In 2015, she founded a not-for-profit company, Global Arts Project, producing concert series for Miami Beach. And she's also co-producing a mentoring program for the Village Pinecrest Gardens called the She Jazz Project. That is with students 13 to 17 years of age. We have Melissa Walker, who in 2002, her passion for performing and working with young people came together and led her to establish Jazz House Kids, which is a nationally recognized jazz education and performance organization. She's a Grammy award-winning jazz vocalist as well, and she's also received the Jazz Journalists Association's Jazz Hero Award. We have Jalani Bridgewater Kowalski. She's the founder and the head of Bridgewater Artist Management. She served as a talent agent before resuming artist management. She runs DDB Productions and DDB Records with client and mother, Dee Dee Bridgewater. She is the associate director for the Woodshed Network, which is a program for women in jazz to provide educational resources, professional support, and to help accelerate careers through mentorship, knowledge sharing, and community. And finally, we have a woman who really needs no introduction, Ms. Dee Dee Bridgewater. I will remind everyone that she is a multi-Grammy award winner, Tony winner, and also an NEA Jazz Master. She is the artistic director of the Woodshed Network. Ladies, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. I want to jump right in with a question for everybody. So I'm curious, none of you had to do this. You all have wide-ranging careers outside of this, but every single person on this chat really has started a program to help mentor women in jazz. Why did you do that? Why did you think that that was necessary? Amy, I'm going to throw it to you to start.
All right, good. I got ambulances going by, so hopefully they won't interrupt me. Yeah, well, this is such a delight, and I'm so excited to hear what everyone else has to say. For me, this project was an extremely selfish way. I wanted to play with more women jazz musicians. So here in DC, we of course had the Mary Lou Williams Festival, and I took part in that when I was in grad school at Howard, and saw all these amazing women musicians and was surrounded by them. And it was a mind-blowing moment for me. And that combined with meeting all of the wonderful women who were a part of Afro Blue at Howard University, and just seeing the ability of women to lift each other up in a space where a lot of times we're pulled apart. And people like to say things like, "Oh, you're the best female piano player." And I'm like, what is that? What kind of compliment is, like, backhanded thing is that to say? And what does that say about, all of my other friends who are wonderful women piano players as well? Just, to try to make people competitive for the wrong reasons. So I wanted to create something that, originally was definitely not, I did not think of it as a mentorship type of project, but ended up with a lot of educational components in it. But for me, at the core, became sort of a mutual mentorship where I could have women from a bunch of diverse backgrounds and ages and performing experience, and come together and to support each other in a performance, but also in putting this festival together.
Jalani and Dee Dee, how about you? How is that similar or different from your project, and why you decided to start that?
I am also on the faculty of the Betty Carter Jazz Ahead program at the Kennedy Center. And for the 2 years until the pandemic interrupted, I was the only woman faculty member, number one. And there were so few women involved in the program. There were more the second year because they had heard of my involvement. And the women that were involved in that program would come to me, and I would always end up doing little individual meetings with them to try and give them advice on things to do for their career. And so at the end of the second year, I thought, I need to do something just for women, because it's always been an interesting, I wouldn't call it a struggle, but I've always had I've always felt that I was fighting for my position in the jazz world. And I was always defending other young women who were trying to get involved in the jazz world. I was involved with Melissa when she started her Chica Girls program. And I saw this need and this thirst to have this kind of association and mentorship from young women with older established women. So that is what really spurred me to begin the Woodshed Network. And of course, when I started it, then of course I had to ask my right hand woman, my child, my manager, my everything, Jalani, to be involved. So that's how the Woodshed Network came to be. And Jalani, of course, has done all of the programming for it. But I think it's about that. There is this need that I find, and I have been mentoring women all my life. And now they call me Mama Dee Dee. But I think it's out of that need to just find someone like yourself that can give you some advice on how to navigate the world of music, and in our case, jazz music. And jazz is a very macho society. It's very, very macho. So it's been about that for me. Now Jalani can speak.
Oh, I mean, well, my first mentor was my mother, right? So I grew up in a household. My grandmother had a very strong personality and was very focused on her career. And of course, my mother was, and I have a sister who's a singer, and I have another sister who's a producer, and I have another sister who's in the medical field. And so I've always been surrounded by strong women. And it was always ingrained in us to not take no for an answer, and to make space where space perhaps didn't exist, and to be unafraid and unapologetic about doing that. And so I think, and I also ended up going to historically women's college, for my undergrad, but I was always entering into spaces and seeking out women. So, my first internship was at Island Records, and I chose the production department, and that kind of dovetailed into wanting to understand the business of music, but also it was an entirely female-run department. And the women who were in that department are still active in music today in different labels. So come up through that. And then my first big, real job in music management was for Ken Fritz Management, but I worked directly for a woman named Pamela Byers, who was the manager for George Benson and Michael Feinstein and so forth. And through my career, the places where I've really found the most growth and the most support has been in the company of women. And so as we began to craft our own spaces, we always work with a majority of women. So our publicist, our business manager, and so forth, because there is, I think that as we progress, it's incumbent upon us to also ensure the progression of people like us and to diversify spaces that are not as diverse, but also to demystify. I think a lot of what in my role, behind the scenes, there's this mystique to everything. And most everything is common sense, communication, collaboration, and support. And I want to be able to share all of that information with all of the young women who are coming up, whether they're performers or if they want to be managers or if they want to get into publishing or whatever aspect of the music business, because in the end, there's nothing that's impossible to understand and there's nothing that's impossible to do, but we need to kind of show the different paths and the components that go into that. So that's really what the Woodshed Network has been about. And honestly, I'm in the business of being a woman. You know what I mean? I think it would be foolish to work against my own interests. And I also like to explain that equality doesn't mean I'm taking anything away from anyone else. And difference is wonderful as long as it doesn't create disparity. And so we're trying to eliminate disparity, and we're trying to create space so that we can all have a seat, even if it means we have to keep building new tables.
I like that. I love that analogy.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and a lot. Melissa, I'm curious, your program started really focused on kids, right? Not on girls specifically. I'm really curious, when and how and why did you decide that there was a need to sort of have this additional focus?
Well, it actually started while I looked around the terrain of Jazz House, and we were just so excited by just young people coming together around this music. I don't think I was originally as attuned to the fact that there were so few girls. In our early stages of the Jazz House, it was just to see 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds coming in week after week and excited and working alongside professional musicians and seeing where that would take us as an organization. But it was really after meeting one young lady that Dee Dee knows well. Her name is Zoe Abadia. She's a very talented alto saxophonist who came to the Jazz House I always tell this story, and she always blushes, but she came to the Jazz House in 6th or 7th grade. Very talented, hardworking, just an amazing young woman, now a graduate from Juilliard's master program. And I asked her what she would like to see at the Jazz House, how she was feeling about her experience. This is a young woman who was a great soloist and always prepared in the top band. Immediately what she said was, I'd like to see some more girls here. And that wasn't what I expected her to initially say. She didn't hesitate. And Jazz House is that organization that's about bridging the gap in the arts. And really it said to me, where have you been in this moment? Where has Jazz House been in this moment? It's not unlike a moment where a student said to me, or said to us in a survey at the end, it was a scholarship student, I wish I could have a private lesson. It's these moments that you think you're servicing, you think you're providing what people need. You do your best, we all do. And then that simple, I wish I could have a private lesson. Again, how do you bridge the gap? And so when Zoe mentioned that, this light turned on that said, we've got to go across that bridge. We've got to figure out and discover why they're not coming. Why is it that you'll go into a elementary and middle school program and you'll go into the orchestra and the band room and over half of the kids are girls? And you walk down the hallway to the jazz band and there's no one sitting there. There's a reason for that. It's not because girls aren't playing their instruments, right? So Jazz House really came organically from a young girl kind of pulling our coattails and saying, hey, hello, I'd like to have some peers around me. And of course we needed that. And then when we brought people like Dee Dee in, Anat Cohen, there was something very interesting that happened. And that was these amazing, incredible artists. They themselves seemed to be transformed by the moment. That in speaking this truth about this journey that maybe in some ways they hadn't even discussed, right? They brought to bear their own challenges in this male-dominated field, right? Being a musical director, yet not really respected, people talking over you, not really giving you, soloing on top of you, these subtle things that are happening. And so, you know, Dee Dee shows up and all of a sudden it's this hug fest. And all of these girls, you know, and she held on to them as tightly as they held on to her. And then it really became apparent that we needed to build these spaces that address the needs of young women, and that we're going to also set the platform for our male musicians and friends and administrators to look differently at what they're doing. It's not a one size, it's not one, what is that phrase? It's not one size fits all. And so, you know, it started as a slow awakening and a discovery. And now now Chica Power is a, you know, full-fledged program for us. And I'm so delighted to see women here grabbing this as well, because we didn't have this, right? Mm-hmm. We didn't have this when we were coming up. And so that's how we got started. But it was that one young lady who, to me, just said, hey, hello, see me. I need something here. And we could address it, and we did.
That's so interesting. As you're just making me remember that when I was in jazz band in high school, I was the only girl. And I think I felt it was kind of okay because I was on the piano and I was like just ever so slightly like that. Yeah. Was, you know, there was something that kind of made that more normal than if I'd been, you know, going in on the trombone or something like that. I think I would have felt much more intimidated.
Well, there you have one of the big kernels of why young girls are not sitting in a jazz band, because it's not simply about access. But how do you feel blowing your horn, you know, when we're taught to be beautiful and demure and a certain way to be a young Dee Dee, you really spoke to that when you came, because it has a lot more about that, Amy. It has a lot more about that, Katie, than the other things you think. We often think it's about access.
Right. Blowing your horn is such a good way of describing it, tooting your own horn and being okay with that, right? Kimberly, I'm curious, can you set up your project sort of within the context of everybody else?
Absolutely. We have been working for Pinecrest Gardens, which is in Florida. We have been lucky enough to have Dee Dee perform for us during the COVID. And the director, Alana Perez, is a classical musician. And she called me in about a year ago. And she also, the same, we wanted to create a safe space, make it accessible, bringing in, you know, well-known jazz artists for female musicians to come in and again, have a safe space. They can come in and learn from them. We have UM here, we have FIU, we have Jim Gazer with the New World School, fantastic high school. You know, we have these great, you know, facilities here. We wanted to make this accessible for them. And we are lucky enough to have Terry Lynn Carrington coming in, which is a huge honor. And we are trying to incorporate Miss Bridgewater in as well. So this is something that's just taking off, and I'm very interested in hearing everybody talk. This is all great for us as well. And we're having a summer camp to get the submissions in for the summer. And hopefully by fall, we'll be putting this, it'll be starting. So it's a She Jazz project in Pinecrest Gardens. We're very excited.
Fabulous. So I want to pick up on a thread. I'm going to toss out my other questions for a second, about this idea of access and entry, because I think that's a really, really interesting and important one. Melissa, you brought up this idea that we always talk about things like this in the sense of, well, once you give somebody the tool, right, then they'll be fine. And so I would like to know from any of you who have this experience, what are you finding to be the biggest barriers to entry for women, whether that's girls starting off, playing, or older, women who are sort of not having some of the same luck or success as their male colleagues. What do you think is really going on, since it's probably not just access or education necessarily?
Well, Dee Dee said it's macho, right? Jazz is macho. It's a male dominant world, unfortunately, sometimes, maybe that has something to do with it.
I don't know. I think that part of the problem is that at least this has been my experience when I talk to young women who are starting their careers, is that they just don't feel comfortable and at home when they find themselves in a setting where they've been engaged to be a part of a band and they are the only woman. They don't have any feeling of camaraderie, real camaraderie, because the sexual difference is there. And they always feel that they're being treated different and set apart. So, and I have always experienced this when I am traveling and I'm with my bands, which up until recently have always been men accompanying me. When the show is over, the guys go off, they do their thing, and they leave me. And, so I'm always left alone. And the only person that I interact with is the road manager, who up until recently was also male, because that's also been a male dominated a role, and or my sound engineer, who is a friend. So I think that it's because of these kinds of situations where women just, the men, I don't think they even realize that they're doing this, and it's just because it's been that way. I remember when I did a tour with for the Monterey Jazz Festival. It was the 55th anniversary of the Monterey Jazz Festival. And once again, I was the only woman. And we were on a tour bus and I was the only woman. And all of the conversations when the guys would get together would be around sports, or it'd be around all the musicians they've been listening to. It would be all of this stuff that didn't even leave me a window to enter into. And so I was always on my bunk in the bus doing my thing while everybody else was congregated out and talking, whatever it is that these men talked about. And until I would draw their attention to the fact that they weren't including me, they were completely oblivious.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of thing, so we always have to speak out and say, hey, I'm here, and even as the leader, I'm the leader of a band, and these cats, they wouldn't care. So I started saying, hey, we're going to talk about things that we can all talk about. We're going to start doing some stuff where I feel comfortable being included. And it wasn't until I just started speaking out, or speaking up, whatever the situation was, that I was included in anything. And that is really part of what led me to want to do something that would create some kind of a community between all of the women involved in the jazz industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel exactly the same way about being the, you know, the odd woman out. And that was something before I started the Washington Women in Jazz Festival. I had been putting out music. I had just put out a new record. I, you know, was really feeling all this momentum and like, here I am to start my career, and I couldn't get booked on any of the jazz festivals. And it's because they didn't really book any women. So it's like, okay, well, I can't be the only one with this problem who has music out that they want to promote, that they need an audience for, and that they want to create some hype about, and to have people actually listen to my music. So it became, you know, this behemoth where I could invite all of these other women who had their own projects, and we could support each other and be in that space and create that kind of conversation, and be able to go on the road together, and be able to invite other women to come to perform with us. And it's something that I've been extremely grateful for, that I did not have in all the other work that I was doing as a side person in the industry. I didn't have that. Even when, yet again, when you're a leader, even when you're a leader, there's still that separation. And everyone thinks, you know, that, oh, there's this boys network. So like everybody invites their friends on their tours and books their friends to gig with them. Everyone thinks there's something like that with women. And it's only now, only now is it starting to come together, where I feel like, you know, I'm calling people to play on gigs, and I'll call, you know, a band of 5 people. I'll call 3 women and one man. Everybody's like, oh, you just couldn't find a woman to play the bass? I'm like, no, I just have a lot of women in my network that I know play at a very high level, and that I know will come into the rehearsal with the music learned, respecting me, respecting my time, returning my emails, returning my phone calls. Women are really great business people. So they're so delightful to work with, and has really changed the trajectory of what I thought I would be doing. I thought I would move to, you know, I lived in LA. I thought I'm going to be, you know, playing with all these people. Somebody's going to pick me up, take me on the road, and I'm going to be somebody's music director. That's what I thought I was going to be doing. And that opportunity was not what was meant for me. What was meant for me was to have these beautiful relationships, and to create a community of women around me that would support my music, and I could support their music. So I think that was a huge impetus for me, and it's such a delightful thing to see. You know, now 10 years on, it's developing in so many different ways, and to see all these other wonderful programs and getting even younger students involved is so amazing to me.
And if I could add to that, from the kind of, when we skew down to the younger girls that we're looking at, we also have to remember that going on in the background is this lack of self-confidence. Right?
Yes.
That when you hit 11, 12 years old, there's not a lot of difference between boys and girls in earlier years in terms of self-confidence, but there is this serious drop-off in self-confidence for young girls. A lot of it about it, which is amplified tremendously in social media today. But now you have body image coming in. How do I look? Well, you know, Katie, you just said it. How do I look? I play a flute, I play the piano, I'm sitting at something, I'm blowing a horn, a trumpet or trombone. That's a whole nother thing. I'm gonna step out. But if we're looking at self-confidence that goes in the 70s, down in the 30s, low 30s and 40s, at like almost half for girls, well, why are you gonna walk into that room where you're only studying, all the musicians who are your teachers are male, all the music you're studying are men, and everybody sitting in the chairs are men? No, thank you. I'm going to keep on going down here where I can have the camaraderie, where I can have the support, where there is peer-to-peer engagement. And I just think that we have to remember that. So we're dealing with a lack of role models, right? And a lack of a safe space where you feel, and a number of the young women will say, and when I sit, and when I do go take that solo or I'm playing, I'm the only one there, or there's only 1 or 2 other young girls. If I don't do it well, I don't play the blues well, I don't feel comfortable, I'm all of a sudden, they're looking at me like a girl. I now am representing all the girls. And so you've got that role model, you've got that lack of confidence that happens. That's only amplified by these struggles of that highly personal aspect of jazz, what it requires, and how personal. And then you've got, you know, just there's just no peers for you to be in. So you don't have the role models in front of you, right? I just myself, goodness gracious, we all know the teens are just awkward. Everybody's awkward, right?
Right.
But I'm now really struggling with all of that about how I look and feel and how they see me. Will I, you know, just all the things that come into place. And oh, by the way, where's my tribe? Where are my peers that would help shore me up for those situations? And so it's not enough just to open the door. You've got to really, I think, or at least we have found, you've got to address those things and shore up those bigger issues that young women are dealing with.
Can I just say that, like, because this goes perfectly, I think, with what Melissa's saying and what Amy has said and so forth, it's that there's also this element of, it's not just, you know, taking the female trumpet player, you know, having that female or woman, whatever. It's also about, we have to demonstrate it very actively, and we have to be really purposeful about how we go about this. So I know that, like, what Kimberly's doing and what Melissa's done and Amy and so forth, I think one thing that's not communicated is that when we're doing these programs, so when we put the programming together for the Woodshed Network, I cannot tell you how easy it is to find a woman expert in every single category that relates to music. So there's this myth that they aren't out there, that we aren't out there, that you can't find a woman who's, you know, into radio promotion. You can't find a woman who, you know, is doing, for example, sound engineering, recording. There are networks that exist of women who are high level experts in every single facet of music, in addition to performance. And so when you start showing that to the women who are participating in the programs, all of a sudden they realize, I'm not alone, number one. There's an entire world of women who are doing this, and I can rely on this particular cadre or cohort of women who I'm with, but I now know that I can go out and I can seek all of these other women. And so then you start to have role models, because it's really important to see a Melissa Walker heading up a program like she does, and a Kimberly creating a space, and a Dee Bridgewater, who's not just performing, but is also a band leader and also has a, you know, recording label and all these sorts of things. And an Amy, who starts an entire festival program to support women, because it not only shows the women themselves to help build that confidence, but it also shows our male counterparts. It's not difficult to find us. We're here, we exist. And in fact, I keep a running roster. If you need to find someone, call me. I've got a Rolodex. Well, that ages me, but I've got an address book full of women who can do any single thing that you want. You want a female photographer? Great. And eventually I'd like us to get to the point where you're just looking for a photographer. We're not there yet, but we're making the space to get to that. But we have to be really purposeful. And I think the thing that I find really funny is people are like, oh, you're just all about the women. I'm like, well, you know what? It's going to hurt for a little bit. You're going to have to hear about it a lot. And then eventually we won't have to talk about it anymore because it won't be an issue, but we're not at that point yet. So we're going to just keep rolling this forward. We're going to keep pushing the boulder up the hill, and then we can all get to a place where it's just not talked about.
We got a little catch up to do, Jalani.
Jalani, you brought up male counterparts, which was a place I wanted to go to. I'm really curious what you all, you know, I think we as a society have been doing some discussions about how work around diversity and inclusion and equity is not necessarily the responsibility of one group of people. So I'm curious what you feel is the responsibility of your male counterparts in the business. What do you want to see from men in jazz who want to support these efforts? What can they do?
So here, and I'm just going to, and then I'll turn it over to everyone else. I want to be very clear. I have had many men who have been incredibly supportive of my career. my first like real job was working for Ken Fritz, as I mentioned, and he and I still have a relationship now. And he's always looking out for me and he's always offering to help me. And I know that he's someone I can pick up the phone and call, because he's never looked at me as a woman manager. He's looked at me as a proficient professional who he respects and whose career he's had a hand in helping to shape. But it never was because I was a woman. And I think once you start to take away that element, I mean, yeah, of course, I am a woman. I identify as a woman. I live as a woman. And I was born into a woman's body, but that has no impact over my capabilities. It has no impact over my intellect. And I think that once we start to see that just because I have a different point of view or a different approach, it's not necessarily due to a gender or a sexual identification. It's due to me being a different person and respecting that. I think that starts to open the doors, and it allows us to, I hate being the only woman sitting at the long table of record executives when I'm representing a client, because immediately I know this is not a space that's going to have a lot of creative thinking. This is not a space that's going to be able to push my clients' career forward. They're not going to be able to envision something that hasn't been done before, because you end up essentially in a ghettoized space. And jazz has enough problems with being marginalized as a music genre without us marginalizing ourselves internally by not drawing on every possible resource, mind, and creative talent that we possibly can. So I think if we want this art form to flourish and to continue, then we need to aggressively be open-minded, because that's what jazz is. It's a democratic art form, and we've been losing our democratic attitude. And I think that's really what's been troubling us.
Yeah,
Well
I love
said.
that. I'm
Well
gonna put that on a
said.
t-shirt.
Well said.
That's amazing.
That was well said.
Very
I-
nice.
I think something that Jalani, that really reminds me of the fact that so many established male jazz musicians and members of the press and festival promoters don't take any chance on women musicians. And they don't think, oh, this could be somebody that, is early in their career and we really want to support and promote. And every time they do that and they bring in an upcoming artist, they're bringing in male artists. And
That is one of the reasons. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to
go ahead.
That is one of the reasons why we started going to the municipalities and getting our own funding. So I could be in charge. I could set the roster to my stage. And, for the last 20 years, and now they're coming to me with funding. And now I'm able to put my own programming together and bring in that artist that maybe might have been overlooked at one of the well-known festivals. And that's important to me. I get the money. I fish out, the funding. I put the production together. And that's a very big part of it as well, obviously. So yes, it's important to me to just get funding to do the program that we want to do, which is what this conversation is about. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah, just seeing the potential in the artists that we have. That I know so many amazing artists that are sending me emails to, I want to be playing a festival, I want to be there. And I'm like, I don't have the budget for that. This is something that I made for DC area women. And I'm really, happy that I can present that. But being able to have the financial freedom is not something that I have. I don't have the major budget of the DC Jazz Festival. I don't have the major budget of the Kennedy Center. And I just want to see people like taking risks on that and taking risks on women and betting on women and investing in women. And I still haven't seen it. And a lot of people are talking a big game, but I'm waiting for the next big artists to be women. Like
and Amy, it's 100% what you water will grow. Mm-hmm. So if you don't put resources and energy behind an entire segment of your music genre, then of course it's not going to flourish. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if promoters don't book female artists, there will not be ticket demand for female artists. I mean, it's you have to have your cart and horse together. And what we haven't had is the cart and horse together. And we're finally getting them, proximate to one another. So a perfect example, look at Lakeisha Benjamin. She's a spectacularly talented artist. She's a saxophonist. I mean, look at Grace Kelly. Look at all of these artists who are not female vocalists. For one thing, I mean, for heaven's sakes, women don't just sing and women don't just play the piano, and allowing women to, like Terry Lynn Carrington, to sit behind a drum kit or whatever they want to do. You know, why is it that men get to do everything, but women can only do certain things? And frankly, if something requires that you have to wear a skirt or a dress, there's something wrong with that situation, not with the person. So it's also about, you know, put your money behind everyone equally, because music is music. Good music is just good music. I mean, Duke Ellington said that, you know, decades ago. There's good music and then there's bad music. And it doesn't matter if it's coming out of someone who is male or female. So there's no reason why Kimberly and Amy shouldn't have the same funding as some of these other festivals.
We had Grace Kelly this year. We had Grace Kelly, and we had just had her about 4 months ago, and she was terrific. Great, really great musician. So I agree with you.
You know, and I think, Jalani, a little bit of what you said, it has to be ingrained in the priorities of the organization. And it has to be thought about in all aspects of the organization, not just, oh, where's my concert with women? Where is that showing up? No, it's about how we're going to change the paradigm of which we operate, you know, who we're putting in leadership positions, who we're going to bring to the stage, on and off the stage, you know, from the workplace. It's about creating a network of and a philosophy of mentorship within the organization. It's about every single time you make a decision that you have that broader lens. Am I representing a broad group of people? Does this organization reflect my community? You know, there's just layers of this that I think have to be brought up, and we're gonna have to be very deliberate about it. And, you know, I often hear, well, who are we going to move off? And, you know, we've got a tremendous faculty. I, you know, love these, but we got to make some room for some other people. And that's just what that sometimes means. We're going to have to make some room. Sometimes we're going to make some room because we can expand. But sometimes we're going to make room because you're going to just move over here a little while and we're going to bring somebody else in. And so sometimes it requires hard decisions, right? But you've got to make some room, and you got to go find people. You know, it's not, well, they're just not walking in my door. Well, it's not their job to walk in your door. It's your job to go out and find people that create the kind of, I think, the kind of workplace, the kind of community that we want to be in. And I think we've got to be really deliberate about it. But I think so often we're box checking. This isn't about box checking. This is about changing the fundamental dynamics. And oh, by the way, when you do that, Zoe came back, and of course I said, you know, how many women in your program? Well, the number was small in the program. And we were in this office, matter of fact, and a number of her peers were here. And the guy said, well, they need some chica power. You know, and when we've gone out and there's no women, sometimes they're like, oh, where's a young woman in this band? Again, this expectation. And so if we do that more often, they enjoy being there with, you know, all kinds of students, right? And so again, if we create that culture, then it becomes noticeable when it's absent, right? It's not an exception for when it's there. It's noticeable when it's absent. And I love what's happening now that I see is that everybody in the organization has this as their priority, right? And it doesn't mean, to me at least, that every time you go out on every single item, we can check off our box. We've got a Black person, and an Asian person, and a woman, and somebody who's 10 years old and 20 years old. But it does mean that you're cognizant that the work that you do has to be a tent that reflects the kind of world you want to live in. And that's about winning that conversation, that glass is always going to be half full, not half empty. But I don't think it's about every single time you go out. So I want to say, you know, you mentioned about the Women in Jazz Festival. I mean, Dr. Billy Taylor was ahead of his time on that. you know, with that tremendous festival, and the Mary Lou Williams Festival, and I remember playing it. I mean, I'd never seen that before, but he was a champion. And so, Jalani, you've said that it's not just our job to carry that water across the room. It's everybody's job. If you care about equity and access and inclusion and ultimately a healthy community and society, then you're going to carry all kinds of water across, right? You're going to carry, you know, you're going to make sure that all kinds of people have a voice here at the table. And, you know, so I think that's really important, that it be everybody's job at the fundamental, really fundamental level.
I just wanted to add something else that you made me think about, Melissa, and that is, you know, the Mary Lou Williams Festival used to be the Mary Lou Williams Women in Jazz Festival. And when they decided to drop the Women in Jazz, I was infuriated, because Dr. Taylor had created this wonderful safe space way ahead of everybody else for women and to elevate women. And I still am in strong disagreement that it's just the Mary Lou Williams Jazz Festival, but what it smacked of how do I say this and be correct? It seemed like they felt that, they had promoted us enough as the women in the space, and so that there was no longer a need to emphasize the women in the space. The festival is still heavily focused on women in the music industry, but they've opened the doors a little bit more. But another thing that I wanted to say is, we still have to, as women who have tried to create spaces and communities for other women in this industry, we still have to continue to fight the fight. And what I do is, when, for example, someone does an interview with me and then the interview comes out and they misstate that my label, because I have distribution through a large label, DDB Records is distributed at this moment by Sony Masterworks, always, not even 9 times out of 10, always the male journalist, and 9 times out of 10, it's a male journalist, will state, oh, Didi is on Sony. And every time I have to write that journalist and say, no, my label is DDB Records and I'm distributed by Sony. And then I have to ask them to do, how do you call it? To go back and, to make a correction every time. So it's about us always having to constantly fight for the respect and the acceptance that we are as capable as the male counterpart. And so it's really about, in the end, it's about us having to shift. And this is a big shift that we're trying to make. The concept that these men have, so many men, that it's not us. We're not the ones doing it. The woman isn't the one doing it. There's always the man that's behind it. And that is something that I'm really still fighting for, and constantly trying to make my male counterparts understand.
It also, I think it's helpful when we kind of couch it in, you're doing yourself a disservice, right? Because like we've said, a lot of men, they don't know that they're doing this. They didn't choose to think this way. This has been ingrained. It's a cultural norm that has been set. And what they're doing by making these assumptions is they're depriving themselves and the rest of us from this wealth of other experiences, of other talents, of other frames of reference and points of view. And so often when I find that I'm really butting my head up against someone who's really deeply holding on to this pillar of, for lack of a better word, pillar of patriarchy, I say, well, you know what, hang on, because in preparing for the Woodshed Network, I've had to go back and do research, and I've had to go and talk to the National Jazz Museum. And there's a long documented history of women's contributions at every stage of this music. So your not knowing about it does not necessarily mean that it doesn't exist. It means here's an opportunity for you to learn more about it. And I'm happy to lead you in that direction. And I'm happy to help you at least find where you can get answers to these questions so that you can start to become more comfortable in knowing the truth about jazz music and the truth about women's roles in jazz music. And yes, there are composers and arrangers. And yes, there are big bands. And yes, there have been presenters. And guess what? Yes, there have been record labels by women for decades and decades and decades. And so, I'm here to help you decolonize your thinking about our music, because it's our music. We're all in this together. If it's healthy, we all benefit. If it's not healthy, we all suffer.
Do you
We
also
have a really good question. Oh, sorry, Melissa, go ahead.
just wanted to say that I think, a number of years ago, we brought in a big band from a strong music program in school run by a woman, and there were no females in her jazz band. And I spoke to her about that. And again, she represents the school. This is the music program. And she told me that female musicians just don't make strong jazz musicians. And I think that I was so shocked by it. She said, oh, and I don't have them in my junior band and my solo. They're just not strong musicians, and they're not strong soloists. This is a woman head of this program. That's where she's coming from. And so I also think what women also have to go into their own closet, and we really have to challenge our own thinking about who gets to lead, who gets to be on stage. What are you judging them? How are you judging an entire music program that was filled with girls, and not one of them is worthy of being in any of the bands? And so I think that we're certainly seeing that paradigm shift now, right? You're seeing women in their bands. Amy, you spoke about what a pleasure it is to have women. Dee Dee, what a pleasure it is to have women in bands. But that wasn't happening either for many, many years. There were certainly bands that had women only. But this idea that, no, I'm going to hire this woman. And we're going to have the presence of women on stage with a female leader. That's a newer phenomenon. And I would say that has something to do with us as women finally taking that back as well. And really getting comfortable that no, we're going to bring our sisters to the stage. And,
Right.
and really, and I think there's still a lot of work there. That's a hard thing to hear. But imagine how many young women in that school did not feel welcome. Well, they weren't welcome.
Yeah, that's pretty cut and dry.
Pretty cut.
Yeah.
It's shocking. I have a few questions from the audience that are great. I want to start off with this one that I think is really interesting. What are your thoughts on organizations' budgets as moral documents? So, meaning that if your budget is a map for where you're putting your resources, are you sort of incumbent there? Is that part of it? Does every organization need to sort of organize their budget around this idea as well?
We're a capitalist society, right? So we all agree there, right? And even though we're working in a nonprofit space, money has to come from somewhere. And then we all know we can't just spend money. You have to sit down and plan. There are generally a bunch of people. It goes through reviews and approvals and so forth. And what you arrive at, your budget, is where your priorities lie. That's what's important to you as an organization. And if we're organizations who are meant to be reflective of the morals and the cultural priorities around us, then by default, every budget is a moral document. It's also a time capsule. If you go back and you can see the progress of an organization by reviewing its budgets over the years. You can see how they've transitioned in their thinking and moved towards other initiatives and priorities and so forth. And the things, it's very rare that you put resources and energy and money behind something and it doesn't move the needle at least a little bit. So if you're not putting money there, it's disingenuous to say that it's important to you.
I would absolutely agree to that.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the only indicator, but it is a strong one, right? It's just as if you want to make sure that kids have access, then you've got to have a healthy scholarship program, right? If you want to see kids achieve who are behind, then you've got to have a way to make sure that they get lessons so they can get caught up. If you care about learning loss, then you're going to create a program over the summer where there's a gap. You know, if you care that there's that girls feel welcome, then you're going to have a program that doesn't just say, well, they can go into that band room, but really is a holistic program about healthy spaces for young women. And then that translates to some of the budget aspects that are needed.
It's the old put your money where your mouth is, right? Kind of situation.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly right. And I think organizations can encourage donors to support a program and to support, to support female artists coming, to support scholarships for young women, to support, any number of things. And, we can encourage philanthropists to seek and support that. I know we usually look for general funding, but there are these really important initiatives that philanthropists can get behind, when they understand it's your priority. And I just want to add that one of the things that we found is that this resonates, and we started something called the Leadership Summit, and it resonates for women who are in traditionally male-dominated fields. So a lot of the supporters of Chica Power are women who are partners in a law firm, and Dee feel like when they all get together, they're sitting over there by themselves. They're architects, highly technical fields, and those women have really been are champions of this because they feel that lack of respect or marginalization, the lack of camaraderie in their own fields. And so we started this program, this Leadership Summit, and then this fall will be our third. We would have been our fourth. And what's interesting, so we brought a judge, we're bringing an astronaut, or bringing someone in the sciences. And so they start to see themselves in fields, if we could bring our vice president, we would, in going into fields that they never imagined. And we all need exposure to what is possible. So that has been very interesting to see the linkage. That's been just kind of one of the things that have fallen out of this work, is that when they come and they're like, I know what she's talking about. I feel that way. And this one woman, just a short story, she's an architect, has her own firm, tremendously successful, wonderful woman. And she says and she usually only has females working with her. But when she does have a male counterpart and they go to meetings, she said so often they'll defer to the male counterpart and assume, that he's in charge and running the show. And so she's been a real supporter of this. And again, I think if you can connect your philanthropy with your priorities, we can impact our budget.
That's really interesting to see the camaraderie, right? Expand beyond jazz, expand beyond music. Another question that came in is there something you tell yourself to remind yourself to be unapologetic about knowing you're more than worthy to have a chance to succeed. So I guess, is there something you do to sort of build yourself up and remind yourself of how powerful and knowledgeable you are?
I try to look in the mirror and just look at myself and remind myself, and even at my stage in with my career, I still have these moments, and Jalani can vouch for it, where I feel still that I haven't done enough, that I am not worthy, that and I lose the self-confidence. And I've just gone through that, literally. And so I try to remind myself and look in the mirror and then sit down and have a meditative moment where I say, oh yes, I have achieved all of these things. Oh yes, and I am worthy. And then once I remember those things, then I try to go out and I try and project that so that people see that and feel that. And in so doing, then it re-establishes my sense of security about what I've done. But I think that for all of us as women, we have those moments where we go, am I, should I? Because we are constantly affronted with the male side of things. You know, I have always thought that it's really important for women to go in and represent themselves as women. And that was always, that's always been something that I have discussed with female musicians.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to put on a pair of pants just because you're out there as the only woman in the band. You can still be a woman. You can still, you know, wear your dress or dress however it is that you like to dress and let the music speak for you. But you've got to be confident in who you are. And I think that that's a large part of our problem as women. We lack the self-confidence, as we were talking about earlier. And it goes into your womanhood. And so if you can establish your confidence and you can believe in yourself, and this is something this is our mantra with the Woodshed Network, you know, then it's going to project itself and people are going to get it and they won't question it because you don't question it.
You know, Dee,
And you also have to have a girl gang. I mean, not to be funny, you kind of need a girl gang. So in those moments, you know, when Dee Dee doesn't feel 100%, she has people she can call. It's me and my sister. When I don't feel 100%, I have her, and then I have a girl gang. I have a girl gang of women who are high-level attorneys, who run literary agencies, who are visual artists, who are homemakers. I mean, because it's not just a quote unquote professional career, but they're women who I really respect and women who I know have my back. They're the women who at 3 o'clock in the morning, I can call them and they'll answer the phone because they're probably awake anyway, because we're middle-aged. But the point is, you also need to create a community and a network of people. And that's what I think all of us really, I mean, all of us here are now a part of this network. And then outside of this, we've built our own, and then they all interconnect. And I think that's something that's really beautiful about what all of us are building, because we're always looking to collaborate with each other. And we're always willing to link our organizations together to be supportive of one another. And that goes beyond just the professional. It's also, there have been times I've talked to Melissa about nothing that relates to music. And it's been something where one of us needed to have someone we could talk to. And then you come away from that and you feel like you're not alone. And then you feel like you're, you know, you can live in the world as a real person. Because I think what a lot of this is that you become invisible, you become diminished. And it's not really so much about, because people keep talking about imposter syndrome. I don't think it's really imposter syndrome. I think it's that we're not being allowed to live in the world in a way that is consistent with who we are. So we're not imposters. We're trying to fit into a space that wasn't crafted for us. Yeah. And when you start to run up against that, it's very disorganizing internally. So you have to be able to reach out and like either virtually or literally touch other people who can understand you and who can say back to you, you're not crazy, or you're okay, or you know what, right now you're not doing all right, but I've got you and you'll feel better soon. And if not, I'll come over and I'll brush your hair, as they think we're all brushing our hair together or braiding each other's hair, whatever it is they think we're doing. But, it's creating that space so that we can support one another, except in mom's case, because mom's hair free, which I'm very jealous of. But, it's about creating that network of support so that you don't have to think it's your internal problem.
Yeah.
We worked with a wonderful young artist whose primary issue was self-esteem. And to see all of the other participants in our program rally around this one young woman and on a daily basis check in with her. They're still checking in with her. I mean, our program was back in March, to remind her, you know what, you're really talented. Like, your artistry is there, but you're also really smart, and you're really this and you're really that. Sometimes you have to have that. And men need that too. Just so we're clear, our whole culture is just not very supportive in general. So men and boys have different issues. I have a son and I have a daughter, and now I'm seeing it in real time. They have very different issues, but they have equal levels of need that are not being met. So we're going to try and fix our corner of the garden. And then hopefully the young men can have their corner of the garden addressed. And then all of us can address our collective spaces in a healthy, productive way.
It's really well said.
Right here. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Can I just add to that, though? One of the things we haven't talked about is the need to be able to gain your skills, right? Dee Dee's success is based on her hard work, and I'm sure some good opportunities that she was prepared for, right? But are you prepared to meet the moment? And that's the thing that we also have to address. Remember, Terry Lynn Carrington came and spoke to our Chica Power students once, and she brought us to the side and said, I also want to make sure that there's going to be nobody who can talk about what their skill level on the stage. My father, as a professional football player in the 50s, said I had to be better than the rest to get where I was. As an instrumental, well, look at that one head of band. What do we have to get above? How great does a female artist have to be to get her attention? And so I think that issue of, what we have found, that young women in particular, they need a place to hone their skills where there's not all that other, how do I look? How do I feel? How do I sound? Oh my gosh, I didn't feel really good. Are you judging me? Judging is really an important aspect of it. So I think we also really have to realize that what we create has to be about improving their skills, getting them ready so they can go to a jam session, making sure that they have that repertoire, making sure that they feel comfortable counting out a song, making sure that they know, what key they're doing it, making sure that they're ready to get in and out of all of those things that are required, making sure that when they meet that moment and have to go to that rehearsal that Amy's going to call them for, or male counterparts, that they're ready. And they need, what we have found, that young women want a private place. They want a safe place to do that. And what has been kind of exciting at the Jazz House, where we really saw it in play, is that, they were kind of like, whenever we would have rehearsals, they're getting ready, and they're working hard. And then we would have a holiday party. And instead of all the girls being in the back room where they used to be and felt safe there, all of a sudden they start coming out to the front. And they start counting off the song. They walk to the front of the stage. And that's because we gave them we gave them the tools for them to really feel confident. Who doesn't need to feel confident to do well? What do you do well in this world that does not require confidence? Right? And so that's a really important ingredient, is the basis for strong skill set.
It's really a combo. It's really a combo of the sort of mental fortitude and creating a space for women to develop that mental fortitude and to develop the hard skills to play the tunes and be able to hang, so to speak, right? With everybody else. I want to know, we're gonna, are there
I
any
have
other
one really brief thing if
Oh,
we
sorry.
I can attach to this. No, I had two tips, very short tips. One is the constant rejection that comes from being an artist. Being able to divorce yourself from your professional identity. Like, I am only as good as my last record or my last tour or my last grant or my last gig or the last person that called me. Being able to take yourself out of that, especially now when everything is everything, to be able to say, I am a good person. I know who I am, and I don't need external validation to know that what I'm doing and who I am and the music that I'm making and creating is part of my soul. It's for everyone. So that's my number one tip. My number two tip is, if you can't make it there, a hardcore fake it tip, my favorite, is I studied, I was obsessed with Shirley Horn, as many of us are, hopefully, and went to see her when I was a kid and just loved to watch her perform, and huge inspiration for me. And when I was in college, I took lessons with Jerry Allen, and we were talking about Shirley Horn and what an incredible musician she was. And she was like, well, if you're like really not feeling the beginning of getting into this piece, you just pretend you're Shirley Horn. I was like, no, I can't pretend I'm Shirley Horn. Me? No way. Like, that's God, like I can't. And it works. It works every time. And I still think about that, that was 15 years ago. I still think about that. So every time I get, I'm in an awkward situation, or it might not be the ideal situation, I'm not comfortable, people are looking at me funny, I don't like my hair, whatever my problem is, I can go into that space and say, well, no, it doesn't matter because I'm Shirley Horn. So let me just sit down right here and treat this with all the attitude and all the grace that I have, that I can muster. So it's a little bit of acting, fake it till you make it. So those are my two thoughts on worthiness.
I just want to know, in a broad way, what's at stake here if we don't continue this work? What should people know is going to happen if we don't do this work well?
We're going to fall back into what's been going on and what people feel comfortable with, and so we will lose all of these strides that we're making. We can't sit down. We can't be still. I, as an artist, I can't sit, and rest on my laurels and expect that everything is just going to be the way I want it to be. It's a constant struggle. It's a constant push to move the thinking forward. So as women, we don't have that luxury to just sit back and expect that everything is just gonna go the way that we think it should go, and that the inclusivity is going to continue. Those doors will shut so fast because we see it just as artists or as individuals in life. If we don't push through on the things that we believe in and that we want, those doors will shut. And those opportunities will end.
And I think we will have failed the women before who sacrificed so much, who had to stand up against so much to be heard, to be seen, to have their story told. We will have failed them.
Yeah.
And
failed them, failed ourselves.
And I think what we're all really, part of what we're all really fighting for is the future, right? So we're fighting for the future of not only women in this music and women in general, but we're also fighting for this music, and we're fighting for this community. And I think we would be very naive to think that the marketplace is going to wait for jazz. Okay, it's not. We're being relegated to the corner of the virtual marketplace. I mean, forget about trying to go into a brick and mortar establishment and find jazz music. They only have shelf space for, 4 or 5 artists, and they're always going to go for the legacy artists. And they're going to keep giving awards to dead men over
living my people, Lord,
let alone living women. So because there's so much fear about losing money. And there's so much fear about not getting the eyeballs, the whatever it is that is going to generate revenue. So if we don't keep fighting for the future of this music, it will die. And I mean, honestly, I look at what's happening with classical music as an ideal negative future. By that, I mean, classical music at least is well regarded and it's well respected and it's globally accepted and it's considered this wonderful intellectual, really kind of high place for music. Jazz, we don't have that luxury. So if we don't continue to keep this thing living and breathing, it will just go away. It'll just become the hotel lounge music that maybe is played by someone who even knows what the hell they're doing. So I think that we have to really understand that in order for us to flourish and to survive and to at least maintain our space, let alone grow our space, we have to think expansively. That means everybody in this community has something to contribute. So it's our job to make sure that everyone has room to contribute and can be heard. So, because otherwise we're all just going to be stems on hip hop tracks. You know what I mean? We're going to evaporate. And also, I mean, I just don't want to sit at one more awards ceremony where you have an entire swath of nominees and 2 are women. The majority are dead men and the rest are people who retired from pop. Like, I don't want that for us. This is my whole life. This is literally my whole generations and generations of our family have dedicated themselves to jazz music. And I would rather not make another penny than see this music die. So I'm willing to make a sacrifice, and I'm not even on the stage. So I think we're putting our money where our mouth is. Because let me tell you, in the nonprofit space, ain't none of us making any cash. It's not about that. It's about our love.
And Jalani, also, when we go in and we present our programs to get funding, a lot of the times we'll hear from the panelists, they'll say, oh, jazz doesn't sell, or, especially here in Florida, and it gets me every time and I fight it every time. And that's where I've gotten confidence when I have won and when I've gotten that funding to put on that, that student stage or to put on that festival or that program. I hear it all the time down here with the CAC grant and with the county grant. Always you hear, oh, jazz doesn't sell. Again, and that's when I raise my voice and I say, you're wrong.
Yeah.
That's where I've got confidence.
Especially because, I mean, look at Europe, look at Asia. I mean,
I know.
We can talk about how jazz sells. Maybe it doesn't sell as well in the United States, but why is that? It's certainly not about the music.
It's a good question.
Ladies, we are going to wrap up now. I want to just give my heartfelt thanks to each and every one of you. I feel really inspired having been through this conversation. So Kimberly, Amy, Jalani, Melissa, Dee, appreciate all of you. I know everyone in our audience today did too. And onward and upward, as they say.
Yes.
Did anyone want to sign off with a final tip to any women who might be listening who need that extra oomph?
If I could say it.
We're here for you.
At Chica Power, we call it rise and improvise. And I think that's what we can do together. And that's what tomorrow's, the seeds we are planting for tomorrow. It's about rising and improvising.
It's wonderful.
I like that. I like that a lot. No, I think, if we just continue to leave our door open and so that the women know that we are there for them and continue to build this community, I think that in itself is going to take us to that next step. We just have to stay diligent and just continue, the fight. So my door is open. The young ladies know that. I'm Mama Dee, so I'm here, and I think that that's what it's all about,
Yeah.
And also I think if we can try to suggest to our peers the beauty of being a mentor. I think that that's also something that we can do, because a lot of people can be so caught up in their own careers that they don't think outside of what they're doing. So that's something that I also try to do.
Yeah.
You're a
And thank you for
mentor to
doing
many,
this
many,
experience.
Dee.
Hmm?
Yeah.
You are a mentor to so many young women. You know, you really have set that table for young women to come to you. And that is so important.
Yeah.
You know, that is really so important. We think it's so easy, but most of us are caught in our lives. And I've
Mhm.
really noticed it is interesting in seeing the program that you did and in March and how you've grown that. We all need to kind of do that work.
Well, you know, I mean, you're doing it. I mean, and we're all of us here on this panel, we are all doing our jobs, we could say. And we're trying to pay it forward, as they say. And I just think that we just have to continue. And I think that, and hopefully by us doing this panel, other people that have been watching this will feel inspired to begin to mentor. That's with a one-on-one. Just start with one person, help one person grow. And that's how it works. You help one person, and then that person hopefully will go out and help somebody else.
Yeah.
It was a
Absolutely.
pleasure, ladies. Thank you. An honor.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Katie.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Katie.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Katie. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Yes.
wonderful.
Bye.
So once again, if we can do a huge thank you to everyone who took part in this panel, it was absolutely amazing. I hope you found it incredibly helpful and inspiring, and I look forward to hearing more about this conversation as we go through this year and into future years. Of course, there are more events coming today and throughout the rest of this week, so please do refer to your welcome email for a full calendar of events throughout the Jazz Congress. Once again, thank you for your love, your support, your patronage, and your dedication to this music. We appreciate you, and we will see you soon. Have a lovely day. Thank you so much.